Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I am sharing a layout that I created for Off The Rails Scrapbooking for their June challenge. The theme is vintage and this photo on the layout was taken in 1969, so I think that's close enough to vintage. When I started work on the layout, I thought I would use papers from this Papercraft Memory Lane paper pad. Once I got started on the layout, I realised that I wanted to have more than just the greens, so I added in some papers from Always and Forever, also from Papercraft. For my background, I chose this pale green wood grain paper, and I'm going to use my modelling paste and my palette knife and put the modelling paste through this Papercraft stencil called Doily. I'm going to do the whole design on the background. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to cut this piece of pattern paper that looks like burlap, but it is only paper. I'm going to cut a frame out of that, a 1-inch frame, so I'm going to take the middle out. To do that, I start cutting at 1 inch and cut down to 11 inches. Then I rotate my paper and do the same thing again. Start at 1 inch and cut down to 11 inches. I do this on all 4 sides. When my wood grain paper was dry, I trimmed that down so that it was 11.5 inches by 11.5 inches. And now I'm going to attach that to the frame. But before I do that, I'm going to distress the edges with my distressing tool and then ink them with my black ink cube. The distressing tool that I'm using is a Prima distressing tool. It's fairly old and I think it's discontinued. I don't think you can get this tool anymore. You can do the same thing with your scissors if you haven't got a distressing tool, but Tim Holtz also has one that's a little round circle and has blades in it. Once I've got that paper distressed, I'm going to attach it to the background frame that I cut out of that burlap paper, and I'm going to use my glue to do that so that I know that it's going to stick all around. Then I'm going to use my distress tool and my ink cube to distress the edges of the outside of the layout. I wanted to make some arrows, well, some arrow heads actually, so I cut a strip of that piece of paper that I cut out of the middle of the background frame. I cut a strip of that 1.5 inches wide. Then I used a die that I had but wasn't wide enough as a template, I suppose, to draw an arrowhead onto the back of that piece of paper. Then I measured down the depth that I wanted the arrows to be, which I think is about 1/2 inch or so. Let's have a look. Yep, 3/4 of an inch actually. And then drew lines under that. Then I did the same thing all the way down my piece of paper. I drew a line straight down the middle, and that way I had a guide where I could cut. So then once I had those lines drawn on my piece of paper, I could then use my scissors to first cut down one side and then the other. I created the first one as a template so that I could then just move that down my strip. You'll see as I go along. I ended up making way more of these arrowheads than I needed, but well, the rest of them can just go somewhere until I need them next time. I chose this dark green paper that looks a bit like a tile background up behind a splashback or something, and I cut it so that it was 10.5 inches long. Now I wanted the width of one tile, so that worked out to be 1 3/4 inches wide. I'm going to start cutting some layers for behind my photo now. All of these papers are from that same pad, the Memory Lane paper pad. I'm going to cut this piece so that it's 7 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to cut a piece of this pale green. I don't want the floral bit, just the pale green piece. I'm going to cut that so that it's 4 inches by 2.5 inches. You can see that I'm sort of planning my layout off to the side there. This all changes. I'm going to make my next layer from this darker green, and I'm going to cut that 6 inches by 4 inches. My photo is 5.5 inches by 3.5 inches. I cut a piece of the burlap paper that I cut out of the middle of the frame. I cut that down to 6.5 by 4.5 and placed that between the darker green and the green spot. It was around about here that I started to think that I needed another colour in with this layout. I took this page from the paper pad and fussy cut all of the flowers and then inked around the edge of all of them. I used an emery board to file around the edge of my photo to give it that fine white border. I wanted to add a bit more interest to my background, so I got some sprays. Firstly, I used Dilutions ink Dirty Martini and made some splatters in the background. Then I did the same thing with Glimmer Mist in Iridescent Gold and Black Magic. I used an old box that I got a delivery in to do this, to try and contain the splashes, but I still managed to get paint and ink everywhere. But at least I've tried. So this is where I decided to bring in some pink. So I got out my collection of Always and Forever and chose some papers from there. I cut that strip of paper out of the bottom of that wood grain and used that on my page. I put it down alongside of the strip of tiles. So I decided to use this small floral paper for behind the back of the stack, and I've cut that 7.5 inches by 5.5 inches. And then the darker pink, I've cut that to 6 3/8 by 4 3/8. The edges of all of these pattern papers have been distressed with the distress tool and then inked with the black ink. Next, I decided I wanted some pink in my background. Now, I'm not too sure that I'm at all happy with this step and the way it's turned out, but anyway, it's done now. I've used my Glimmer Mist in Cherub Pink, and I have used I tried using the end of the spray nozzle, but that didn't work, so I got a brush, a soft brush, and dribbled paint, or dribbled the Glimmer Mist along the top and the bottom of my layout. I made it quite wet and let it run down. It looks alright, and it's given the page a lot of glimmer. It's got a nice sparkle to it, but I don't know that it actually added any pink to it, and maybe it just made it look dirty. Not sure about this step even now. While I'm waiting for that to dry, and it did take quite a while, actually I left it overnight, but I went ahead and attached all of my photo stack layers. I used double-sided tape to do this. The burlap paper ended up being about the same size as the paper that was on top of it, and you don't really see a great deal of that paper, but it is in there and you can see it if you look. I attached that strip of fussy cut flowers to the tile strip so that it was about central on the tiles. I tried this branding strip on here and I liked the look of it, but it wasn't quite wide enough, so I cut a piece of the darker pink pattern paper to 5/8 of an inch wide by 10.5 inches long, distressed all the edges and attached that on top of the tile strip. I wanted a tag on my layout, so I used this stitched tag die to cut a tag from the pink spotty paper. I used my crocodile to add a gold eyelet to that tag. Makes it much easier for me to thread the white crochet cotton through it that I'm going to add. I cut my crochet cotton to about twice the length that I want, then thread it from the front to the back and put the loose ends through the loop. Okay, now my background is dry and I'm going to start attaching all of my elements to my page. I'll use a mixture of double-sided tape and glue to attach the bits and pieces to the page. I decided that I wanted to add some cheesecloth to my layout as well, keeping with the vintage theme. So I'm going to attach some underneath the photo, well, under the bottom of the photo. So I cut a piece and stretch it out of shape and then use a bit of glue to attach it to the page. The photo stack is then attached so that it slightly overlaps the top of that cheesecloth. I'm going to put some music on and put fast forward on to go through this attaching all of my elements to my layout, but I just wanted to remind you that there is the challenge over at Off The Rails Scrapbooking. I will put a link in the description box below, so if you feel like having a bit of a play around with a vintage theme layout, why not pop over there and have a look. You can enter your layout and the chances that are that you could have a very good chance of winning a prize, so pop over and check that out. I also wanted to remind you that if you're not already a subscriber to my channel, I would love it if you would subscribe. I'm getting close to 1,000 subscribers now, and I'd really like to reach that milestone, so please think about doing that for me. So here's a bit of music and a bit of fast forward, and I'll come back to you shortly. While you're watching this, you might notice that some of the elements are stuck directly to the page and some of the elements are mounted on chipboard scraps. This gives it a bit of extra dimension. This is a photo of my sister and I, and that's me on the left. So there we have everything in place. I wanted to add a bit more sparkle to my page, so I used my Wink of Stella clear pen to add some glitter to all of the green flowers. To create my title, I used my Tim Holtz Alterations die called Inside Out. It cuts the outline of the letter and the inside of the letter, and I used the darker pink cardstock to do that. Now I'm going to use my glue to attach the title, which says Sisters, to the bottom of the photo. I really didn't know where to stop with this layout because once I'd got to this stage I decided that I needed to have some black scribbly borders around all of my pattern papers. So I used this Mitsubishi fine black pen and drew scribbly border around the whole page, around the arrows, around the green tile strip and the tag and the pale green pattern paper. You can see the scribbling borders better in the close-up photos. So that's my layout for today. I'm glad you could join me. I hope you'll pop over and check out the challenge over at Off The Rails Scrapbooking, and perhaps subscribe to my channel if you're not already. Thank you for watching my video, and I hope you'll join me for my next one. Bye.